Welcome back, and welcome back to this, our 53rd show. Each time here at Palestine Deep Dive, we have a special focus on the Middle East, what's happening, and obviously we look very closely and carefully at what is happening in the Palestinian territories. And we take a wider view too at what's happening internationally. And we're very much looking forward for all of you joining us, sending in your questions. We're keen to hear from as many of you as possible. My name is Mark Seddon. I used to work for Al Jazeera as a UN correspondent. I then worked for the United Nations for the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and more recently for a President of the General Assembly. But far more importantly than any of that is our guest, Mona Shtaya, back with us again. Delighted to see you, Mona. Thank you for joining us. Mona's in London. And
thanks for having me.
Not at all. And we're going to be, I think we're already getting questions. You can probably hear my phone pinging. But thank you so much, Mona. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, who perhaps haven't come across Mona before, here's a little bit of a background on her. Mona is a Palestinian digital rights defender and works as an advocacy advisor at Hamla, the Arab Center for the Advancement of Social Media. And she's also a non-resident scholar with the Middle East Institute Cyber Program and an MA candidate in social media and digital communications at the University of Westminster. And we are going to be focusing very much today on deep state surveillance, what the Israeli state is doing, and the experience of Palestinians who are facing this surveillance, but also others outside, including possibly us. But look, what we should do, if we don't mind, Mona, before we get into all of that, there has been today, you'll be aware, this major development, this court decision in Israel, which is they've decided, this Israeli court, that there are at least 1,000 Palestinians, and I think in half a dozen villages, who are going to have to be moved out of the way to make way for a military testing ground, a firing range, I think. I think the firing range has been there for some time. But I just wanted to ask you what your reaction to that is to begin with, and also just explain to us, how is it possible for a court in Israel to pronounce on land in occupied Palestinian territories and to be determined to push 1,000 odd Palestinians, possibly more, from their land? I think this, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, this is one of the biggest expulsions of Palestinians from their land for quite some time.
Yeah, as you mentioned, that like this is a huge thing for Palestinians, because like having such decision, like since the last year, like this is part of the systematic oppression that we Palestinians are exposed to. And since the last year, when the Israelis also were trying to forcibly displace people from Sheikh Jarrah, families from Sheikh Jarrah, and from their homes there, it was a big issue, and people were like talking about that, spreading that, sharing and amplifying their voices, and talking about what's happening there. But this is not the first time that's happening, because it systematically happened also in other places in the Palestinian territory, because all of the Israeli settlements are built in the same way. I'm personally coming from Salfit. Salfit, it has like one of the biggest settlement outposts, where we have like a couple of settlements, and they, if you just look at Google Maps, you can see that those settlements who were like, which was built on our own land, my grandparents' land, is now bigger than my own hometown, Salfit. And you can see how they are forcibly displace us and ethnically cleansing us just to build their illegal settlements, and just to have those lands to test their military services and their military products, and other like and other kind of military activities that they are like exercising. And this is not new. We Palestinians have been exposed to such things since 1948 and 1967 and so on, because like we have the Nakba and the Naksa and other things. Until now, we are exposed to same systematic practices, like which basically aim to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from their homelands.
Mona, what's the expectation of Palestinians who have learned after this long battle with the Israeli courts and what have you, that they're going to lose their homes, they're going to lose their villages. What is the expectation from them, from the international community, and also from citizens around the world?
So basically, we as Palestinian, we usually have this kind of demand that people can change that. People like who are watching us, who are hearing this session, they can change that. They can put pressure on their governments, on their representatives, on their MPs, congressmen, congresswomen, just to change that, to stop this awful practices from the Israeli regime against us Palestinians, and try to stop them. This is one thing, but the other thing, it's also about creating a progressive movement and built on what's happening in Palestine, amplify Palestinian stories, amplify Palestinian voices. It's really sad to see Palestine trending for 1 month last year in May, and then no one is speaking about that. We are not done yet. We did not like Sheikh Jarrah is still threatened. Like, people there are still threatened. Gaza Strip is still under siege, and this summer marked the 15 years of siege on Gaza Strip, and many others, like the illegal settlements, are still expanding on our homelands. We are now going to talk about surveillance. We are still like the biggest laboratory for the Israelis to test their surveillance technologies on us before selling that worldwide, and profiting from occupation. So people can change that. People can take action. They can tell their members, their representatives, to stop that and to take action, and to just like anyone can do anything, including amplifying Palestinian voices and spreading the Palestinian narrative. And just be aware about like how the media coverage is being done. Like, we've been criticizing that for the past month. We see how escalations on the ground were covered in the international mainstream media, and how they are using their terms. So people can change that. They can follow Palestinian people, amplify their voices, and also share what they are seeing there from the Palestinian voices, not from like the biased media, or like just sharing news that they don't know. Like, I mean, it's quote unquote objective, because there is like kind of power relations there. There is an occupier and occupied, a colonizer and a colonized people, and we should reflect that in our communication and news, and as well as our tweets and social media content. So people should take that into consideration when they are talking about Palestine.
Well, Mona, in recent weeks, we've been focusing also on what's been happening in Ukraine, which is happening at lightning speed, with people being driven from their homes and villages, and a kind of ethnic cleansing going on there. And we've been contrasting the reaction of many of the countries, and especially in the West, to what is happening in Ukraine, to what's happening in Palestine. And of course, people are already sending in questions, by the way, on all of this, and we'll come to them in a minute. But look, if I may, before we go to some of these questions, the title of the show is Nowhere to Hide. You'll recognize that because I think recently you wrote a piece for the Middle East Institute, and you described you talked about Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham, here we are, look, here's the piece, The Impact of Israel's Digital Surveillance Regime on the Palestinians. Jeremy Bentham, for people who are interested, you can still go and see him. He gets wheeled out every now and then. He's in a wardrobe. He's kind of like Lenin. He's kind of preserved. But anyway, he did come up with this idea, which he described as the Panopticon. And could you explain what you were talking about in that article, how you relate Israeli surveillance to 18th century Jeremy Bentham and his Panopticon?
Yeah, basically, the Panopticon is, just to simplify that and to explain that for people who have never or who are not really aware of what is a Panopticon. The Panopticon is basically a mechanism of social and psychological control. It's like basically it talks about a prison, around the prison, that have like prison cells, and in the center of this prison, it has like a tower, a watching tower, where the guard is standing there, and they have like a very high light. they are exposing the slide, or they are using the slide just to make sure that they can see what the prisoners are doing, but prisoners cannot know, or they don't know if someone is watching them or not, because the slide is really strong enough not to let them know what's happening behind that. And this is basically what we Palestinians are exposed to in the ground. We are being watched and surveilled, like, on every single thing that we are doing. If we are walking in the streets with the CCTV cameras, if we are using our phones with the spywares, if we are on the internet and the surveillance on the digital spaces, and even if we bought a new device and it's going somewhere, for example, to Gaza Strip, or if it's being used, like, or even if we are just crossing a checkpoint, a military checkpoint in the West Bank, we are also being surveilled and monitored. We are going to talk about that into details, but basically, we Palestinians are living now in the postmodern panopticon. It's been updated, and it's been like they utilize the technology to update or upgrade the concept of panopticon, and just to make us feel that we are surveilled all the time, and trying to behave based on that, and to adapt our behaviors based on that.
Can you tell us something a little bit about the type of surveillance? Because here in Britain and elsewhere, we've been reading in recent months about this Pegasus spyware and how this company has hawked its goods all over the world, and there have been all other governments that have bought into it because they've soon seen that it's rather useful for spying on their own dissidents. Can you tell us something about that, about Pegasus? And about the type of surveillance, the specific types of surveillance that Palestinians are facing?
Okay, so let's try, like, from zooming out, the type of surveillance that we are exposed to. Basically, Palestinians are exposed to multi-layer surveillance because we have, like, surveillance on daily life. This is like where we are, like, just exposed to surveillance, as I mentioned, on the checkpoints, CCTV cameras, and other things. We have also surveillance for, like, spyware surveillance, where they are, like, trying to threaten human rights defenders, political opponents, and other human rights organizations, just to shrink the civic spaces for work. On the other hand, we have many other kinds of, we have the facial recognition, which basically was being, like, developed. And I don't know if you are aware, but, like, 2 years ago, Microsoft was going to invest millions of dollars in Anyvision, which is an Israeli company, trying to develop the facial recognition technique and test that on Palestinians before selling that worldwide. And after a huge campaign, an international campaign, advocacy campaign, they put pressure on Microsoft to stop this investment in Anyvision, and they stopped that. So because of that, people can change things, they can put pressure, and they can, like, they can respond to the call to actions, and they can support that to stop such companies and governments from doing so. We are going to talk more about Pegasus. I'll start, like, from Palestine and then going to the outer world. Let's start from what happened in last November, when 6 of Palestinian human rights defenders were exposed to, or their mobile phones were infected with Pegasus spyware. And basically, those Palestinian human rights defenders, they discovered that, like, through frontline defenders, the organization, and, like, because they doubt that they have something, and after they check their phones, they discovered that they have it. And we know that this is just, like, it's threatening them, it's affecting their own, like, life, it's affecting it's an invasion for their right to privacy, as well as it's affecting their right to freedom of expression. Because when people know that they are being surveilled or watched, they are changing their behavior, they are censoring themselves. The other people, they have a chilling effect, so they won't continue sharing whatever they want to share, because they are afraid of being censored or surveilled on the online spaces. So that said, that means that surveillance is really, like, putting, like, restricting and threatening our human rights, which is like, and our digital rights. And if we just look, like if we just make a zoom out and look at the world, we can see also other governments who are just like collaborating with the Israeli government and with the Israeli surveillance corporates to buy such surveillance techniques and to use that against their human rights defenders, political opponents, journalists. We've seen like many cases in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Morocco, and in many other countries in the Arab region, where those regimes basically are buying such spywares to spy on their political opponents. And last, like just in the past couple of days, it was revealed about a new cases where there was around 200 mobile phone, and basically more than 200 Spanish mobile numbers were selected as possible targets for surveillance by NSO group clients. Like they believe that it might be to be Moroccan, according to the data leaked at the heart of Pegasus project. So basically, it's now being used widely. It's also being used against diplomats, against officials, and that kind of, like, we've seen like a groundbreaking investigations by Amnesty International, by Citizen Lab, and by other human rights organizations, where they revealed about hundreds of names and of people who were exposed or infected by NSO, Pegasus by NSO. And
Well,
yeah,
Mona, if I may, we've got a question here. This is from Linda. Linda, she's in London. She says, "Hi, Mona. There's been a lot of controversy over the Pegasus spyware over the recent months and years, but less attention has been given to the Blue Wolf technology. Can you shed light on this?" Now, before we do that, before you come to the question, Mona, we've got, I think, a very short. Well, I would say short, a couple of minutes, but a very interesting little piece from Al Jazeera on just this. Perhaps we have a look at this if we can, and then maybe you'd also like to answer the question from Linda.
Even before Yasser Abu Markhie presents his identification card at this Israeli checkpoint, the soldiers already know who he is. He has to cross this checkpoint to get to his house in Hebron, in the south of the occupied West Bank. Many cameras monitor his journey home. They're a part of an advanced Israeli surveillance system that includes face scanning cameras and live tracking. The cameras are so close to Yasser's house, he says his family has lost any sense of privacy.
We had see-through curtains before, but I changed them after I heard an Israeli soldier say I can zoom into any house I want and see what happens inside.
In addition to these cameras that have been put up by the Israeli army, just a meter down, residents tell us that Israeli settlers have put up another surveillance system here in Hebron.
In 2019, the Israeli military acknowledged this non-official system exists. Children here don't feel safe in their own homes. A few months ago, Israeli soldiers raided this house, woke the children up to take their pictures. A Palestinian sociologist says the surveillance system shows how much the Israeli occupation controls Palestinians.
We are looking at a generation of Palestinians who is anxious, angry, and filled with fear. They feel their lives are useless, and on top of, they're asked to smile to their occupiers.
The Israeli army has installed visible and hidden cameras across the West Bank and told Al Jazeera it's for security reasons. The army doesn't comment on its capabilities, but Palestinians believe there are thousands of cameras monitoring them. Recently, some Israeli soldiers revealed they've photographed Palestinians. These photos are then used for a smartphone app called Blue Wolf. The app matches the photos to the person's details in the system and alerts soldiers if the person is wanted for arrest. Israeli organization Breaking the Silence collected the soldiers' testimonies.
The most shocking thing for me, for us, was to hear that we are sending now our soldiers to compete, military units to compete against each other for who takes more photos of Palestinians in the streets.
Even in their homes, Palestinians like Yasser say they feel violated. He fears Israel might use the private data to evict his family out of their house. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, Hebron, in the occupied West Bank.
I mean, that's really disturbing. This is the work of a police state, actually, and I'm guessing also that some of the brave Israelis who are standing up against it and speaking out are also being surveilled as well. But can you tell us about this technology, Mona? How widespread it is?
Okay, so basically it started 2 years ago when they developed or launched the new initiative of surveillance, and basically it includes I'll speak about two wolves. The first one is the blue wolf and the other one is the white wolf. So the blue wolf basically is when the Israeli soldiers on the checkpoints are taking pictures of Palestinians and their IDs, and they are sending those pictures to their database because they are archiving our pictures, our IDs, and then this application, which they call quote unquote Palestinian Facebook, because they are basically collecting the Palestinian people data. Basically, this application is showing them again, quote unquote, how dangerous this Palestinian is, because it kind of give them like an indicator if this person like is a security threat or not. So basically they are using that actively, and they are taking pictures of Palestinians on the checkpoints, and that started in Hebron, but later on it was expanded in other like West Bank cities, and most recently there was like a new news that said like it's also being now used against foreigners who are visiting Palestine. So basically this is to take pictures and to like to feed this database and to collect Palestinian people data. And when we are talking about that, it's like they are forcing Palestinians, and as Uri from Breaking the Silence said, they are competing to take more pictures for Palestinians and archiving that, because basically they are competing about that. And later on, we've heard that the Israeli government is forcing their soldiers to take 50 pictures of Palestinian people like IDs, and collecting 50 people like data before they are leaving their shift. And if they did not do so, they are not allowed to leave the shift. And that's dangerous. Like it's basically who's gonna like collect more data, who's gonna like also violates people's right to privacy. And this is really dangerous if we are talking about human rights and digital rights basically for Palestinians. So we are not talking about something new. It's been like it's happening for years now, but now with like talking about many other kinds of surveillance, it's really intense to live under that kind of surveillance. The
Mona,
other thing, which is the white wolf.
Yeah.
Like just briefly, the white wolf is being used by the Israeli settlers who are not like in military. They are just Israeli settlers who basically hire Palestinians who are working in the Israeli illegal settlements, and they are taking pictures for those Palestinians before they letting them into the settlements to check if those Palestinians are also security threats for them or not. And this is also like part of how this state is a military state. It's a surveillance state because everyone there is surveilling on us and is spying on Palestinians.
I mean, it's interesting you're saying this because it seemed to be much more pervasive. The advance in technology means that there are so many different ways of spying on people, just going about their ordinary business. But you might have thought that this would begin to alarm the Israelis themselves, because it might be the Palestinians now, but it may well be much of Israeli society next. So is there a common ground that there can be to a sort of fight back against this this spyware, this surveillance? Is there a link up between groups in Israel, or Israeli groups with Palestinian groups?
So we have, we saw like how in November when the Israeli when Israel designated 6 of Palestinian human rights organization as a terrorist organization, how the Israeli human rights organization they basically they condemned that, and they supported the Palestinian organizations, and we saw that publicly. But the issue of surveillance is not only about against Palestinians; it might also like impact or affect, let's say, the Israelis, but in totally different levels, because 2 years ago there was a groundbreaking investigation that was published on one of the Israeli media outlets that basically said that the Shabak, which is the Israeli intelligence service, are spying on every on the mobile phone calls for the Israelis themselves since 2002. So basically, we are talking about like something like back for like 20 years back they were spying on the phone calls. And just imagine that in 2002 social media was not there, that technology and the smartphones was not as now. So since then they were doing that, and they are now developing and adapting their tools. And because like I'm now reading a book, it's called digital militarism, and I highly encourage people to read that, because it basically shows people how Israel is being utilized, like is utilizing social media to adapt their tools and to adapt their military services based on this kind of developed technologies. So basically they are developing that, so it's affecting Israelis as it's affecting Palestinians, but it's not in the same level. It's not like they are not spying on them as much as they are doing that with Palestinians, because again there is this kind of power relation, the colonizer and the colonized, the occupier and the occupied.
Well, look, Mona, before we go to another question that's just come in, because the question is related to it, we've got another short video, and this is a film that was taken recently in Gaza of drones in action.
وقتاش أكتر وقت بتسمع فيه الزنانة؟
الزنانة بتكون العصر لغاية نص الليل تقريبا.
وقت الهدوء في الليل قبل النوم هيك ب5 دقائق.
بيجي بده يمد حاله بده ينام صوته زن.
أي لحظة تقدر تسمعها في الليل في النهار في كل لحظة.
الساعة 6 الصبح تسمع صوت الزنان أكثر من صوت العصافير.
بالليل لما أجي أنام والكهرباء قاطعة بتهلكني.
أكثر وقت بسمع فيه صوت الزنانات بالليل.
كل وقت هي اللي على مدار الساعة موجودة.
في النهار يعني ممكن يكون موجودة بس مع الضوضاء بنسمعش، بس هي موجودده يعني في السماء 24 ساعه.
لما تكون كمان قاطع الكهرب وهدوء تام بتلاقي الزنان بتيجي ارجع بصراحه طول الليل تقول مطور ولا مولد جنب راسك.
نفسي من كتر صوتهم هي مزعجة امسكها وفتشتها بايدي عن جد.
لما يكون الصوت يعني زيادة عن حده بتحس انه انت في ممكن يصير اشي، ممكن يصير عملية اغتيال،
ممكن صار شغلة، ممكن يردوا بدهم يردوا وضلني متوتر، بعدين اقول خلص بتعب بنام.
يعني الزنانة معروف انه مصحوب باجواء حرب وباجواء سابقة، يعني ذكريات قديمة. يعني
أنا بخاف كتير وما بعرف أنام وهيك بقلق كتير وبتوتر.
يوم ما نسمع صوت الزنانة في مصيبة حتصير، إما اغتيالات أو قصف أو دمار للبيوت.
هي تعمل عمدا لإزعاج الناس وقلقهم.
Well, we can only guess what all of that must have in terms of affecting people's mental health and their sleep and everything. But there's a question here. This is from Hillary. She emailed. She says, "Is surveillance against Palestinians worse in Gaza or the West Bank?" And of course, those drones we've just seen in that clip were over Gaza.
So the question should not be, is it worse or better? Because like there are different aspects that we are talking about when we are talking about surveillance, and it would never ever be a good surveillance or a better surveillance, because surveillance is surveillance everywhere at any time. And if we are just going to talk about, because they were talking about like Gaza Strip, like 2 or 3 months ago, a couple of months ago, there was also another report that mentioned how Israelis are putting bugs into every mobile phone that is entering Gaza Strip, so they can continue to spy on people and they can have like this kind of overseeing what's happening there. So basically, they have this kind of authority to do so against people who are living there. But if we just like go deeper in this, we know that Israelis are basically controlling the ICT sector in West Bank and in Gaza Strip, and Palestinians till today they don't have access to the internet. Like basically in the West Bank they have access to the 3G, and in Gaza Strip they are still using 2G, while Israelis are now almost using 5G. So there is this kind of digital divide or digital apartheid that is like basically being used there. And controlling the infrastructure, meaning definitely that also they can violate people's right to privacy, because everything is built on their infrastructure. So when we are talking about like just putting bugs or here and there and putting surveillance cameras and putting like using blue wolf or something like that, it's part of their infrastructure, which is basically like it's rooted with the infrastructure, with the ICT infrastructure that we Palestinians cannot control. And if we just think like about that, that means that if they want to stop or to disconnect us from the world by stopping the internet, they can do so because they are controlling the infrastructure there. And that's dangerous. That's like should alert all of us. Like when we are talking about the right to privacy, what does the right to privacy means when they are controlling our ICT infrastructure and when they are controlling our borders and they are like just putting bugs in the new devices that entering into Gaza Strip, and who knows, maybe they are doing that also in other places. So basically, it's really dangerous when we are talking about like which one is worse, because we can't see this is where we can't say this is worse and this is better. No, like surveillance is always bad.
From what you're saying, Mona, they're trialing different types of surveillance in different parts of the territories, whichever gains them the most information. And by the way, you know, our own experience here at Palestine Deep Dive over the past year or so has been that very often we have problems with linking with our guests in the Palestinian territories, partly because of technical issues, because people don't have the same access, as you were saying, to high-speed internet, and also because there could well be disruption. And just we're still wondering. Last week, for instance, we interviewed Dr. Baguti, and he was in Jerusalem, and we were really, the focus was on the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dr. Baguti's own experiences there, and the interview was disrupted. Well, you could say there was a technical issue, but we also had our own technical issues ourselves with our own social media. So you know, you don't have to be paranoid to think they're out to get you, because they probably are. But look, a couple of other questions and points. Zahir Tahir, he says that an Israeli company, I'm presuming it's a surveillance company, is operating in the United Kingdom, operates on the London Underground and many parts of the other UK. I don't know about all of that, but anyway, that's Zahid's point. Mehdi Jandoubi, he asked a question, you know, given the digital hegemony of Israel, of the oppressors, is it still possible for people to go under the radar? Can they escape this surveillance?
So based on what I wrote in my essay, I don't think so, because, for example, a woman in Jerusalem said in a report that we published last year, she said, exactly as this man in Hebron, she said, I feel those CCTV cameras are entering to my home. So basically, I'm putting my hijab inside my kitchen, inside my home. And that means that people feel that they can't escape surveillance. And thinking about the Panopticon, or going back to the Panopticon concept, when we are talking about the Panopticon, we are not only talking about the physical surveillance, we are talking about the surveillance effect, because people start to feel that they are surveilled, that they are working on this kind of thing because they want us to feel that we are surveilled, even if we are not surveilled at the moment. So we are adapting or changing our behavior based on that. So I don't think as Palestinians we can escape surveillance, because as I mentioned, they are controlling the infrastructure, they are putting CCTV cameras in the streets, they are controlling the digital spaces, they are also taking pictures of our faces on the checkpoints. So basically every single thing in our life is being militarized and securitized by their surveillance technologies. And that said, I don't think we can escape that. And if we want to dismantle that means that it has like a long process to do so. And also we can't, if we are thinking about that, if we escape surveillance, we can't escape surveillance implications on our behavior and on our trust with each other as society or with others, based on what surveillance created, like the fear of expressing our opinion, the fear of just going out to the streets, the fear of like the chilling effect when I see someone is being oppressed or just being surveilled, a human rights defender just being surveilled using Pegasus. As a human rights defender also have this kind of fear of being surveilled, and that means that I have this chilling effect, and that's definitely like create this kind of fear all the time, and based on that adapting my behavior. So we can't escape surveillance basically.
I'm just also wondering about Palestinians in Israel proper itself. Are they under surveillance as well?
Basically, yeah, because we are talking about surveillance everywhere, so they are surveilled. And there is a new piece that was published like a couple of days ago about the drones, and basically it said that they are using drones to surveil on people who like basically participate in the protests in the West Bank and like in the Palestinian territory and in Israel. So basically every like Palestinians are being surveilled everywhere. And basically, when we are talking about Palestinian citizens of Israel, we can also mention that they are also struggling with the affordable and high quality internet, because when we are talking about like the Arabic communities or the Palestinian communities inside Israel, they are also struggling because okay, they have like Israel have the 5G, but it's not really affordable and it's not really for everyone. When we are talking about Palestinian communities there, they don't have like the same access as someone who's Israeli and living in like in another spot. So basically they are also exposed to the same kind of discrimination and the same kind of surveillance.
Mona, because time's beginning to run a little bit short, and I just wanted to ask you though. It's quite a practical question, really, for activists out there in Palestine, activists around the world, people who just take an interest, people who are maybe watching this. How do you know whether your phone has been hacked into by Pegasus spyware or Blue Wolf or whatever it is, whatever the system is? How do you know whether your laptop or phone has been? How can you tell? And what can you do about it?
Yeah, so there are some practical tools that basically big organizations like Amnesty International, who worked on Pegasus project, they prepared like a toolkit for people to tell them how they can check their mobile phones. And it's highly recommended for people who doubt that they might be surveilled to check their phones. They can visit Amnesty International website and they can check that. It's really important for all of us to check our mobile devices to see if we are hacked or not. This is one thing, but the other thing is there are like digital safety tips that people should usually think about, and they should like think about before opening any kind of suspicious links, or if they have like if they are using like any kind of social media or emails or any kind of communication channels, they should put like the 2 factors authentication to make sure that, but this is like, it's just a small tactics, but it doesn't mean that it's really protecting people, because some people, they are using that, and when they check their phones, they discover that they being hacked, because obviously these companies are developing their tools. So basically, when Pegasus started, it was like they were sending people a suspicious links, and people should click on those links to get hacked. But later on, they developed their tools, and they started to be a zero-click spyware, so they can hack your mobile phone even if you didn't click on a link. And that means that those companies are developing their tools. Therefore, people should think about changing policies and putting pressure on governments and other tech companies to make sure that these tools and these surveillance technologies are not invading our right to privacy and affecting our other human rights.
I wonder if we could, kind of finally, Mona, if we could turn to something. There's a question actually from Hamish in Aberdeen, because he asked what happened to censorship against Palestinians on social media. He says, I remember last year there was lots of censorship. Has it got worse or better? And of course, this is what we talked about the last time you came on the show. So, I mean, this is different to surveillance, but it's a different form of control. What's been happening recently with social media and prominent Palestinians? Have their accounts been removed? Are they being hacked? What's going on?
Last month I published another article which basically talks about the double standards for social media companies in taking serious measures, when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, and when we are talking about the Palestinian case, because they are still censoring Palestinian voices. And I don't know if people are following up, but last month they basically Facebook stopped Al-Qastal Facebook page. And Al-Qastal is a media outlet that's based in Jerusalem, and they are covering like a day-to-day human rights violations and the news there. And like over the past month, it was like escalations were going like on the ground, and people were really threatened, and they were really attacked from the Israelis. And at that time, it was really important to have this media outlet in Jerusalem. And Facebook basically took down this page. They restored it later on because they didn't they restored it, and we were able to. We at Hamle, we have HUR, which is a Palestinian Digital Rights Observatory. We have reported that, and we were able to restore it. But to be honest, that doesn't mean it's also like higher or like more or less. It's about taking measures, because whenever they want to take serious measures, they are taking that. We've seen that with the Ukraine-Russia case. We can't see that till now with the Palestinian case and with other minorities and other communities. So basically, we are still censored. Our narrative is still censored. And like Al-Qastal page is one case, but there are like multi other cases that we usually say. And just to let people know who are like watching us now, we at Hamle are organizing the biggest digital activism forum. It's called the Palestine Digital Activism Forum, and it's an annual event where we are discussing like surveillance technologies, content moderation, and among other topics that's related to the Palestinian digital rights. So if anyone is really interested in hearing more about that, they are welcome to visit our website and to register for that. It's basically www.pdaf.ps, and they can register there for any session that they are interested to attend, because we are going to cover to deep dive into these topics and to cover each of them alone.
Well, thank you, Mona. I'm sure we'd love to try and cover that as well at Palestine Deep Dive. And there's the invitation for all of you out there. So please do get involved. Look, I think we are drawing to a close, sadly. We're very, very grateful to Mona for joining us today. Thank you very much indeed. Also, Mona's extremely busy, as you can see, but she also has time to do a lot of writing. And so there are a few links for you out there to watch and to look at. So please do, and follow and support her work. There we are. The Digital Activist Forum is there. Hamle's Digital Activist Forum is there, the link. So look, thank you very, very much, Mona, for all of us at Palestine Deep Dive. Good luck to all to what you do. Please come and give us some advice about our own cell phones and whether we're being hacked by Pegasus or whatever the horrors are going to be inflicted on us. But thank you, Mona. We'll keep in touch. We'd love you to come back on the show again. Thanks to all of you who sent in your questions. And Marilyn Walmsley says, thank you very much. Thank you, Marilyn. And thank you to all of you. And until next time, goodbye.
Thank you for hosting me. And it's really my pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you.